Hey guys, welcome back to our podcast. I'm Erica.
And I'm Brandon.
And this is Living Proof. We're navigating all things married life and parenthood. And we're going on this journey together, unveiling God's love, His grace, and His mercy. So we want you guys to stick around, stay tuned, and be encouraged.
All right, baby. So episode 5. How you feeling today, honey?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Not too tired.
Not too tired. Y'all, you don't even know the half. When we've tried recording these podcasts, I think the last 2 episodes, we've done it super late at night. I don't know what we were thinking, but we put the kids down. We ate dinner.
What are we thinking? I mean, that's the time we have.
I know,
let's be honest.
But we've done it.
Fellow parents
okay,
out there.
let me change that. Let's say, what are we thinking? Because we've recorded these podcasts laying down in our bed.
Yes. As of right now.
That's probably not the best thing, because it turns out to be just a loopy, funny, hot mess.
But it's fun.
It's fun. But anyway, so today in this episode, we are actually going to dive into some mistakes that married couples make in their marriages. We have made these mistakes as well. These are mistakes that we often have to recognize and, say like, hey, this is what we're doing right now, and so that we can fix it. And, you recognize it and you fix it. And so after looking at a laundry list of some mistakes that people make, including ourselves, we came up with our top 3 mistakes that we think a lot of people make. And so, we want to just shed light on that and kind of talk through it.
So the first mistake that Eric and I felt that has impacted our marriage greatly, that we felt we wanted to share with everyone, was the unrealistic expectation that you may have towards your spouse.
Yeah.
And this one has a lot to do with when you get married. Sometimes you have this expectation of who your spouse is going to be and what they're going to do. Are they going to clean the house a certain way? Are they going to leave their clothes on the floor? Will they have sex with me this many times a week? Whatever the case is, whatever that expectation is that you may have, that is a false expectation and maybe not a realistic one. Or you hold your spouse on a pedestal almost sometimes of having such high expectations of who they are, that when they do fail or do something that is not aligning with that expectation, it ends up becoming...
it ends in disappointment.
And resentment.
Yeah.
Right? Would you say resentment, Erica?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it was something in our marriage where we both had maybe an expectation of each other going into marriage, because we were dated for so long. So we had all these expectations, I think, already.
Yeah.
So I think we had different expectations for marriage. Would you agree with that?
I think one thing that is very important is when you go into a marriage is made up of 2 imperfect people coming together, and it's by the grace of God that, you're growing together and you're going through life. Although you're flawed and although you're imperfect, you're going through life and you're kind of perfect for each other. You're imperfectly perfect for each other, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. As it pertains to having unrealistic expectations, you have to understand that those are actually high standards that nobody else should be able to fill other than God. And so it kind of goes back to what you were saying about when you start to idolize your partner. When you have these unrealistic expectations, it's really because you've idolized your partner and you've put them on this pedestal. And now that you guys are entering into a marriage together, or you guys have, entered into this covenant with one another, the minute that they don't meet that expectation, they're on this pedestal. The minute they don't meet that expectation, they fall off the pedestal, and then it ends in disappointment. And, it ends with, like you said, you sometimes you can have resentment for your spouse if you have these unrealistic expectations. And so I think the most important thing is, first and foremost, the only person that should be put on a pedestal in your life is Christ. And I think that looking to the Father first and prioritizing your relationship with God first, it will solve all of those issues when it comes to unrealistic expectations, because you realize that you have a perfect Father and you're not looking for that or trying to find that in your partner.
Yeah, and I think that's the big part of it is that no one is perfect, mm-hmm. and your spouse is not perfect. You're not perfect. There's going to be flaws. There's going to be imperfections. There's going to be growth. What we talked about in our earlier podcast a few episodes ago is there's going to be growth. There's going to be that refining process in your marriage constantly. I mean, this is 2 people coming together, being one flesh under God.
Yeah.
There's going to be a refining process in your marriage. The same way your walk with Christ alone has that refining process. Mm-hmm. I believe marriages have the same aspect, just because of how important marriage is
Yeah.
in the kingdom.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think,
Two Christians becoming one against the enemy is so powerful.
right.
Right. So
Right.
anything is going to come and try and destroy that.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I also think too, like, you know, there's something to be said when you understand and you recognize that the person you're with is not without a flaw, and you still give them grace in spite of that. Like, that is how you're supposed to be. That's how, what Christians are called to do. It's just as Jesus extended grace to you, even when you're undeserving and you're unworthy,
Yeah, that's
you
good.
also should pay it forward and do the same for other people. And including, if you're not going to do it for anybody else, do it for the person that you call your husband, or you call your wife, someone who you lay down with at night, you share the same bed with, you have kids with. Like, extend that same grace. I think when you can have the healthy conversations of, okay, what have I had in my mind, or what has my image been of my husband, because I can only talk from a women's standpoint, but what is this unrealistic idea that I've had of my husband? Because that's also not fair to my husband. That's also not fair to you if I have these unrealistic expectations. And I'm also not even having the conversation and sharing them with you. Like, hey, this is what I'm expecting. And if it's unrealistic, let me know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that's really good. I mean, from our relationship, do you have an example of an unrealistic expectation that maybe you had going into our marriage that revealed either disappointment or something that you had to process and realize you had to give me grace on?
Yeah.
That
Well, I think, one thing that just really stood out to me, there actually have been a lot of times, I think for me, a little bit more than you, I would say, I did really struggle with having unrealistic expectations in the very beginning of our marriage, specifically because I was a little immature in my thinking, in the sense that I thought when we got married, everything was going to just fall into place and everything was going to be fine. And obviously I knew marriage was hard work, but I don't think I was truly prepared for it until we were actually in the marriage, if that makes sense. And so for me, going into it, I had these unrealistic expectations of what you were supposed to be like as a husband, or how you were going to be with me, how doting and loving and all these things that you were going to be with me. And not that you weren't any of those things, but I think that I did go into the marriage putting you on a pedestal and not even realizing it. Like, I put you on the pedestal where God was supposed to be. And although, yes, I praise God, I read the word, I went to church, I served, I did all those things, but at the same time too, I was okay with missing my devotional time, or I was okay with missing a Bible study, or whatever it was, if that meant that I got to spend that time with you, or if that meant that we could miss church a Sunday because I want to go, take a drive with you somewhere, whatever it is. And that may seem small and that may seem little, but doing that often and all the time, it subconsciously makes you less aware of God the Father, and putting all of your energy and time into your one person that you're with. I think for me, one example that really stood out was the minute that things went left in our marriage, I was like completely heartbroken and didn't even know where to go, because I put you on a pedestal for so long. And I don't really want to be the one to share your testimony, but it's no secret, that you struggled with a porn addiction. And when I found out about it, because I knew about it when we were dating and you worked through it, but then finding out that it now was actually brought into our marriage, that made me lose it. And I think that in that time, I probably would have been obviously still upset and mad, and I still would have gone through all the processing and all that stuff. But I think that it would have hurt just a touch less had I not put you on a pedestal and God was on that pedestal in my life. And although, again, only by the grace of God, that we still worked through those things. And I realized, after counseling with our pastors and things like that, where I placed you, and I placed you above God, I realized that when I started to work on my relationship with the Father and cultivate that relationship, I gave you in return, because I had the grace that God gave me, I gave you that same grace. And I think that that's when breakthrough and healing started to happen in our marriage in that time period. And so Yeah, I think unrealistic expectations definitely are rooted in the enemy, because he wants nothing more than for dissension. And when you have
And yeah, and division.
unrealistic, yeah, and when you have those faulty expectations, that also comes with dissension and division when your partner can't live up to those expectations.
Yeah, and I was actually gonna bring up a good point, and thank you for sharing, babe. That was really good. Um, I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your testimony with that. And I was gonna say is that all these mistakes that we have here, ironically, all in a way have to do with division
Mm-hmm.
and the
Yeah.
enemy trying to divide because of our own pride,
Yeah.
our own selfishness,
Yeah.
and then it comes off as things that we have to work through in
Yeah.
the marriage.
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what you said earlier, was when you said the enemy wants nothing more than for a marriage to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially when it pertains to a Christian marriage, the enemy wants nothing more than to steal, kill, and rob you of your joy. And, he wants to sever the relationship between you and your spouse, because he knows that when there's two God-fearing people put together, they're unstoppable. And I think that, these mistakes, like you said, these mistakes that we're going to talk about, a lot of it is rooted in division. And so let's actually dive into our next mistake, because that kind of leads into also how the enemy likes to divide spouses, which is taking each other for granted. This is big, because
Yeah, this is a big one.
something like
This is
this,
so easy to
yeah,
happen.
it's
Like
so
it is
easy to
so.
happen. I mean, this can occur one or two things. It can occur like when you are with somebody for a very long time, there's that factor of comfortability. When you know somebody for so long, or when you're with somebody doing the same things day in and day out, doing the same routine, you fall into the routine and the monotony of everything. Where's the growth?
Yeah, I
And
think
where's
this one was big for us
mm-hmm.
because, and I think we've already talked about this many times with everyone, but we were together. We dated for 6 years, right, honey?
Mm-hmm.
6 years.
Mm-hmm.
6 years, and then we got married. Then we had kids fairly quickly. I think our first year of our marriage, we weren't together that much because I was in the Navy and Eric was finishing up school, and then we had a kid shortly after that, and it all of that, and then
Yeah,
being
what's
together for so long, really caused us to fall into almost that complacency of taking each other for granted
yeah.
because we spent most of our energy towards Santana.
Mm-hmm.
We started to neglect our marriage, not on purpose, but
Yeah.
just because of the day-to-day of work and being with the kids and
Yeah.
all of that. It just naturally occurs, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's why you have to be aware and alert, because it becomes so easily in your marriage. It sneaks in almost a complacency.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is then if you have complacency, you start to lose intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm complacent and I'm not showing her my appreciation for her and how much I love her and care for her and appreciate how she's doing as a mom and all those things, that's the intimacy piece that's going to be missing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're soon going to become almost like a roommate,
Yeah.
which is what we talked about
Yeah.
a lot. Is like in the past we felt like almost roommates
Yeah.
raising our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so unhealthy,
Yeah.
because that's not how a marriage is supposed to be, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not how
That's not
you want
God's
to
design.
facilitate your marriage in front of your kids.
Yeah.
Because it just becomes, again, exhausting too.
Mm-hmm.
It's exhausting being in that mindset of
Yeah.
being almost disconnected with
Yeah.
your spouse.
Well, I think it's exhausting, but I do think that it sometimes it's almost inevitable if you're not actively working towards growing together. It's almost inevitable that you guys will grow apart. And I think that's what happened with us for a little bit there, is that we were just kind of growing apart. And I think it's a conscious decision. Like, you have to actively choose your partner on a daily basis. You have to actively choose to not take your partner for granted. And some ways that you would do that is, kind of like Brandon said, just show your appreciation towards one another. A simple thank you, actually not forgetting about your partner. And if like, guys, if you're on your way home and you're stopping by, a store, run in and get your wife some flowers, or get her favorite candy or her favorite snack or whatever it is, and bring it home to her and just say like, hey, I was thinking about you. These are little gestures, like very small gestures, but they can also seem so big when you have a wife at home with a screaming baby, a screaming toddler, changing diapers or whatever it is, or even if that's not, if you guys don't have kids yet, but you guys have been together for so long, it's also easy to get caught up in careers and, your things that are happening personally to you and all these things. And so it's very important for you to not become complacent and for you to show your appreciation even in the little things.
Yeah, and I think, and actually, can I just share something really quick before we go to the next one?
What?
What?
What are you?
No, this is
I
something
always
biblical.
get so. Oh, okay. Because I was gonna say I always get so nervous when you say, "Can I share something?" Because I'm like, what does that even mean? But go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's a fair statement actually, because you should be nervous. No, I was gonna say this actually made me think of the relationship between God and Israel, or like just Jesus and the church, and like that relationship. And that's how marriage is supposed to be. I think we talked about that in our previous podcast, and how you were saying how easy it is to we take for granted our spouse and what they're doing, and every day it's a conscious decision. You have to be willing to choose your spouse every day. You have to be willing to choose to pursue your spouse every day. You have to be willing to show them love almost sometimes. Sometimes because it does take work, because you are exhausted, you are tired, you are stuck to the day to day. And with your relationship with Christ, you also have to be willing every day to choose God, choose to walk in obedience, choose to not take for granted that Christ has died for your sins. Like those are conscious decisions that we're supposed to be making on a daily basis. And it applies to the marriage too. That relationship's the same. And that's how the Bible describes it too. And that's why I think the Bible does describe it that way, because God calls us to pursue him, and God wants to be co-labor with us, but we have to be willing.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important in a marriage too.
Yeah. Well, I think before we move on to our next one, I think that it's so true what they say is that anything worth having, it's not going to come easy. It comes with a price. And, your relationship with Christ, God, in the Bible, God does not say that when you say yes to him, you're going to live a life of pure bliss and you'll never have a struggle. You'll never go through an obstacle. Like, actually, God does promise us that we will still face trials and tribulations. But with him, we have a certain hope and we have a certain level of confidence knowing that he's already gone before us and he's already won the battle. And so I think that same mindset can also transcend into your relationship with your spouse. It's like a marriage is worth it. It's just hard work. And it is an active choice. You have to actively choose your partner. Investment. It's an investment. It's a it's a lot that goes into it, but when you both have that mindset, it's like something as simple as, even the divorce word, even when the going gets tough and it's almost easier to just bow out gracefully and be like, okay, like things aren't working out. We're not on the same page here. Like, let's get a divorce. It's a lot easier to part ways than it is to stay in this marriage. And, when you take that mindset out of the equation, like literally Brandon and I think that like, no matter what, we're going to be together forever. Like, we don't even say the divorce word. Like, or a lot of times Brandon will be like, I'll give you a break. And he'll be like, you go in one corner of the house, I'll go in the other. And like, I think, but when you have that mindset of, okay, there's no end to this. This is a forever thing. Then you have no choice but to actively work on things. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It makes 100% sense.
Yeah. So
well said, my darling.
Thank you.
It just made me think of that. When when you get in an argument with your spouse and you're both in the same house, and and that comedian Dave Bargatze, I forget his name. And it's like you're that moment you're both like about to cross each other because you're arguing, but then you both like need to go to the kitchen or something, and you're like, oh, sorry, yep, and you can walk right past you.
You tried to limit eye contact.
Yeah, I tried to limit eye contact. Just anyway, sorry, that came into my head. But what is number 3, honey?
So the last one, which is huge, and I think I want to start off by talking about this because this is the last one is being overcritical. Or being overly critical of your spouse. And this is basically where you have constant criticism that actually negatively impacts the intimacy in the relationship, the trust in the relationship, as well as the communication. And so I will literally be the first one to say, I know that this is something that I've struggled with. It's something I still am struggling with and trying to work on. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with those unrealistic expectations. Because when you're still having a certain level of unrealistic expectations, I think that also comes with it also, or I should say, it also results in being overly critical, because you're thinking your spouse should be and act one way, and maybe that's just unrealistic for them to do that. And so innately you're overcritical of them, because you're like, why aren't you doing this? What's going on? What? And so I say all that to say, I think for women, we may struggle with this a little bit. And I'm not saying that men don't, because I definitely think that there are some husbands who definitely do struggle with this. But I think for us ladies, and maybe, also tell me if I'm crazy or if anyone can relate to this, but also like when you are seeing your husband step into the role of fatherhood for the first time, or when you're seeing how, just experiencing new things along the way in your marriage, and you're seeing him step into that leadership role as the man of the house. Sometimes we can tend to be a little overcritical about the things that they do. And I know for me, like, I've had to watch my tongue with how you are with the kids,
Yeah.
and sometimes I can be a little overcritical because you don't parent the same way that I do. But that's not a bad thing, or that doesn't, and I've had to like kind of bring those things to the Father and pray about it and ask him to soften my heart and crush my pride, because just because we don't parent the same way, that doesn't mean that one parenting style is worse or better than the other. And so, yeah, I definitely have struggled with this, and it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. But what's your take on it?
No, I think I would agree with that. I think being overly critical, again, stems from that unrealistic expectations, because then you're basically criticizing small things that honestly, in the grand scheme of things, should not matter. And I don't want to say minimizing anything that is an issue, or if it's like a serious thing that a spouse has to overcome or they need to get through, or it's something they're growing in. I'm not talking about those big things, but little things can cause such frustration. For example, maybe your husband left his socks on the floor again, or something like that. Being something so critical that can cause so much frustration can cause a lot of dysfunction in.
I agree, and I think you're right, but I also think that little things like that, though, like especially when it comes to like women and moms and stuff like that, little things like that, I know it doesn't seem like a big deal to a man, but little things like that can actually seem like big things to a woman, because she's dealing with all the stressors of, keeping the house tidy, or figuring things out with the kid schedule, or figuring out what's for dinner, or all these different aspects. And so like those little things, yes, they are very little and they are very minuscule, but it's almost like, that saying, the straw that broke the camel's back. It's kind of like the littlest tiny things can actually make for a woman to like blow up. If that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. Probably a bad example. The saying.
Yeah, like if you're,
don't sweat the small stuff.
Yes.
I'm not trying to say the small stuff does not matter, because that does matter, and that probably would frustrate me, because I'm a clean freak, and I can't stop moving for more than 5 seconds cleaning the house. So that would even frustrate me. But I'm saying sometimes we have to pick and choose the battles,
right? Okay, yeah,
that we want to like. Do we really want to get frustrated right now if I have to pick up an extra pair of socks and put them in the hamper?
Yeah.
Do I want that to cause division in my marriage, or do I just want to maybe understand maybe that he just missed the hamper, or he's just being lazy this moment, he's tired from work? I don't know.
Yeah.
But and then vice versa, the male to female, like, am I going to be frustrated if my wife keeps adding dishes to the dishes? The sink?
I'm sensing some hostility here.
No. This is not an example for our marriage, although it really is. Sorry.
Listen,
I digress.
We're digressing. Anyway. But I also think this actually just made me think of one thing. So we talked about being overcritical. And I think to the flip side of that, which this was not on our agenda for talking about, but I think on the flip side of that, it actually is very important to talk about, just as much as it's important to not be overcritical of your spouse, I think it's also just as important for your spouse to not be so defensive when it comes to critiquing and it comes to criticism. And so what I mean by that is, you guys, you have to be willing to hear what is on your spouse's heart. And if they're sharing something and they're saying like, hey, this is what you're doing that I don't like, or this is what you're doing that has been ticking me off, and obviously you say it in a way that's going to be well received and well reciprocated, but you can't get defensive about the criticism that you're receiving if it is being if it's being portrayed to you in a respectful manner, if it's being portrayed to you in a way that is well received. Because if you're going to constantly be in a defensive mode, you're never going to be able to have resolution. You're never going to be able to have experience connection with your spouse. And so I just wanted to put that out there too, that it's just
you have to be receptive
yeah,
of what your spouse is communicating to you. Always try and come from a humble place. Try and be receptive. Try and be willing to receive the criticism. And I think one of this, and I will say is, I know we haven't talked about this in any of our podcasts yet, I don't think, and we probably will, is how important communication is in a marriage.
Yeah.
Because, man, I was terrible at that. I'm still, like, sometimes I'm not the best at communication. Sometimes I bottle things inside, and I hold it in until one day I just explode, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think
But that's digressing.
Yeah, well, I definitely think we can do a podcast on specifically how to effectively communicate, but that actually segues into, have you guys checked out our ebook? Because communication is actually one of the chapters in our ebook.
Yes, it is.
And it actually goes into some good detail about ways to communicate, ways to effectively communicate. And so I highly encourage you guys to check out our ebook and stay tuned, because we definitely will come out with a podcast very soon on all things communication. So be prepared for that. But anyway, we are very thankful that you guys decided to tune in today, and we look forward to making more content for you guys. Be sure to check us out on all social media platforms, on our TikTok, as well as our Instagram at _BeLivingProof. And we will see you guys in our next episode.
Yeah, thanks, guys.